Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It started like any other trip. Jessie and her friends had planned a weekend getaway to the coast, a much-needed escape from their hectic lives. They had booked a charming Airbnb cottage by the sea, small, rustic, with a view of the cliffs. The reviews were glowing, the host friendly, and everything seemed perfect. The first evening, the place felt cozy, almost too cozy. The windows creaked in the wind, the floorboards groaned, but nothing unusual, just the sounds of an old house. They spent the night drinking wine, laughing, and playing cards. The host had given them a tour when they arrived, mentioning the place had been in the family for generations, but it had been updated for comfort. There were little trinkets and photos on the walls, things that gave the cottage a sense of nostalgia. Around midnight, Jessie went to bed first, exhausted from the drive. Her friends were still up, but she needed rest. As she lay in bed, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The bed, though, was surprisingly comfortable. However, after a while, she began to hear strange noises coming from the hallway outside her room, soft footsteps, as if someone was pacing back and forth. She assumed it was just the house settling, or maybe one of her friends going to the bathroom, but the pacing continued. Slowly, it became more deliberate. Jessie's eyes snapped open. She was wide awake now, heart racing. She sat up in bed, straining to hear. The steps were getting closer, now right outside her door. She held her breath, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps stopped, and then the knob turned. Jessie froze. She could hear the metal creak under pressure as if someone was trying to open the door, but it was locked. She knew that for sure. There was no way anyone could have entered. Her breath hitched as she realized there was no way to explain this. The door remained still for what felt like an eternity. Then the footsteps moved away. Jessie's mind raced, but she tried to shake it off. It was nothing, right? Just her imagination, the wind, or maybe even one of the other guests. She pulled the covers over her head and tried to sleep. The next morning, when she met her friends in the kitchen, they were in a similar state of unease. One of them, Emma, admitted she had heard strange sounds too, but she thought it was just Jessie moving around in her sleep. It didn't sit right with them. They brushed it off as overactive imaginations and decided to enjoy the rest of the trip. They went out for the day, hiking along the cliffs, but Jessie couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, the feeling only grew. As they sat around the fireplace, there was a knock at the door. The host, a woman in her late 50s, had warned them about people coming by, local neighbors or the occasional delivery. But when Jessie opened the door, no one was there, only a folded note on the doorstep. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The note was written in spidery handwriting. "You shouldn't be here." She showed it to her friends, but they just laughed it off, chalking it up to some sort of prank. They even joked about how creepy it was, but Jessie's unease continued to grow. The house felt different now, as if it was alive, watching them. Every corner seemed darker, every shadow more menacing. That night, things took a darker turn. Jessie was once again in her room, lying in bed, but this time she kept the door slightly cracked, convinced she wouldn't hear anything if it was just the house creaking. Around 2 a.m., she heard it. Soft, slow footsteps again. But this time they weren't coming from the hallway. They were coming from inside the room. Jessie's heart slammed in her chest as she realized she was no longer alone. Something was in her room with her. Before she could even react, she felt a hand on her shoulder, cold, clammy, and unmistakably real. She screamed, bolting upright in bed, but there was nothing there. The room was empty. Terrified, Jessie rushed out into the living room where her friends were. She wasn't sure if she was losing her mind, but something had changed. The house, or whatever was in it, was awake now. They decided to leave the house. Despite the late hour, they packed their bags and left. But when they went to check out, the host was nowhere to be found. The place was empty, but the door was unlocked. It didn't make sense. They had barely made it down the road when Jessie glanced back at the house. The lights were on, in every room, and standing at the window, staring out at them, was a figure. Someone watching them leave. They never came back to that cottage, and Jessie never forgot the cold touch on her shoulder. Months later, She looked up the history of the place online, curious if there had been other reports of paranormal activity. The cottage had once belonged to a family that had mysteriously disappeared many years ago, leaving behind only rumors and chilling stories. The most unsettling part was that, according to the records, the last family member to live there had died in that very room where Jessie stayed. The cause of death? No one knew for sure, but it was rumored they had simply never left. The thing that haunted her most was the note, the one that was left on the doorstep. Because when Jessie looked at the bottom of the note, she saw a name, one that she didn't recognize. But then it hit her. The handwriting matched the name on the host's registration. That wasn't the host at all. It was her, the woman who had been watching them.
Story number 2.
It was supposed to be a peaceful trip, a solo retreat in a quiet town far away from the chaos of the city. Laura had rented a small cabin, nestled in a forest on the outskirts of a town she had never heard of before. She needed some time alone to unwind and clear her mind. The cabin was remote but beautiful, surrounded by tall trees and a serene, untouched wilderness. No internet, no distractions, just her and nature. When she arrived, the place seemed perfect. The host, an elderly man named Mr. Worthington, had left a note on the kitchen table with simple instructions for her stay. He was kind and reassuring, telling her to make herself at home. He also mentioned that the cabin had been in his family for generations, and there was a certain charm to it that visitors often found comforting. The first night was peaceful. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional crackle from the fireplace. But by the second day, things began to feel off. It started with the feeling of being watched. Laura couldn't shake the unease that seemed to follow her as she walked around the cabin or sat by the fire. At first, she blamed it on the isolation, the quietness of the place playing tricks on her mind. But then she heard something that made her blood run cold. She was sitting on the porch, sipping tea, when she heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path leading up to the cabin. It was midday, and she hadn't seen anyone since Mr. Worthington dropped her off. Thinking it was just him coming back to check in on her, she stood up to greet him. But when she stepped outside, the path was empty. No one in sight. She brushed it off, but as the day wore on, strange things began to happen. Items in the cabin would be moved when she wasn't looking. Her toothbrush was on the bathroom sink when she went to bed, but by morning it had been placed on the windowsill. The kitchen cupboard doors were left slightly ajar when she knew she had closed them. Then there were the whispers. Faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. Late at night, when she tried to sleep, she would hear murmurs, soft voices coming from the walls. At first, she thought it was the wind or the house settling, but it soon became clear that it was something else. The worst part, though, was when she went into the basement to grab a jar of jam from the pantry. The basement was dark, filled with old wooden shelves and dusty crates. As she reached for the jar, something caught her eye, an old photograph, face down, wedged between two crates. She picked it up, and when she turned it over, her breath caught in her throat. The photo was of Mr. Worthington, but much younger. In the picture, he was standing next to a woman and a child, his family, she assumed. But what made her stomach churn was the strange, hollow look in their eyes, as if they weren't really there at all. The more she stared at the photo, the more the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She felt a chill rush over her, and she quickly dropped the photograph, deciding she'd had enough. But as she turned to leave the basement, she froze. The door was shut. The door to the basement had closed behind her. She hadn't heard it, and there was no reason for it to have closed. Panicked, she tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. She banged on the door, shouting for help, but the more she struggled, the more the whispers around her grew louder. They were all around her now, like 1,000 voices murmuring, too faint to understand, but too close to ignore. She turned in desperation, her heart racing, but she saw something in the corner of her eye, a shadow, a figure standing in the darkness. For a split second it looked like Mr. Worthington, but when she blinked, the figure was gone. She slammed her shoulder into the door, and this time it gave way. She stumbled out of the basement, gasping for breath, but the air felt thick, suffocating. She didn't stay another minute. She grabbed her things, ready to leave. As she stepped outside, the woods seemed even darker, more foreboding than before. But when she reached her car, ready to drive back to civilization, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Mr. Worthington was standing at the edge of the woods, staring at her. His face was expressionless, his eyes empty, like the people in that old photograph. But what chilled her to the core was the smile that slowly crept onto his lips, a smile that wasn't kind, but twisted, unnatural. Laura didn't wait to see what he would do next. She sped off, heart pounding, not looking back until she was well out of the town. But as she drove, the whispers didn't stop. They followed her all the way home. Years later, she found out the truth. The cabin had indeed been in Mr. Worthington's family for generations, but no one had ever really left. His family had disappeared long ago, swallowed up by the woods. The locals had learned to stay away from the cabin after hearing strange stories about the voices in the walls, the feeling of being watched, and the figures that roamed the woods after dark. Laura never went back to that town. But sometimes, when she's alone at night, she hears the whispers again, soft and insistent, reminding her that some places are never truly empty, and some things never leave.
Story number 3.
The invitation seemed innocent enough, but Maria should have known better. She had recently reconnected with her college friend, Lily, who invited her to a weekend retreat at a remote cabin in the mountains. Lily had promised it would be the perfect getaway to catch up and unwind, with no distractions, the kind of place where you could leave all your worries behind and truly relax. Maria, always up for an adventure, agreed without hesitation. When Maria arrived at the cabin, she was immediately struck by how isolated it was. It sat at the edge of a dense forest, nestled between two steep cliffs, with no visible neighbors for miles. Lily, ever the enthusiast, greeted her with a wide smile. "It's perfect, isn't it? I've come here for years. You'll see. It's so peaceful. You can hear the wind through the trees at night, just like a fairy tale." The cabin was old but charming, with wood-paneled walls and large windows that let in the mountain views. The air was crisp, and the silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional bird call. Everything felt idyllic, like the type of place you'd expect to see on a postcard. The first day was uneventful. They spent it hiking, cooking, and talking about their lives since college. But when nightfall came, something strange began to happen. Maria had noticed odd details about the cabin that she had initially ignored. For one, the walls were covered with an unusual number of old photographs. Photos of strangers, people Maria didn't recognize. The faces in the pictures seemed oddly distant, their eyes too vacant, their smiles too stiff. There was something unsettling about them, but Maria chalked it up to the cabin's age, maybe a few previous owners' quirky tastes. Later that evening, after they had retired to their rooms, Maria lay in bed, trying to sleep. But no matter how much she tossed and turned, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was as if the air in the room was thick, pressing down on her chest. Her eyes drifted to the window, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw something move in the trees outside. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of the light, but then she heard something. A low, rhythmic tapping on the window. Her heart skipped a beat. Slowly, she got out of bed and went to the window, her breath fogging up the glass as she peered into the darkness. There was nothing there. She sighed, relieved, but when she turned back to the bed, she froze. There, sitting on the edge of the bed, was Lily. Maria's pulse raced. "Lily, what are you doing here? It's almost midnight." Lily's face was expressionless, her eyes wide and unblinking. She didn't say anything at first. She simply stared at Maria, her lips curling into an eerie smile. "Maria, you have to come with me," Lily finally said, her voice sounding strangely distant. "We have to go." Maria's stomach twisted in confusion. "Go where? What's going on?" Before she could react, Lily grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. Maria, in a mix of disbelief and fear, tried to resist, but the strength in Lily's grip was unnaturally strong. She was dragged down the hallway, and when Maria stumbled into the living room, she saw something that made her blood run cold. All the photographs on the walls were now different. The people in the photos, who had once looked like strangers, now resembled her, every single one of them, their faces twisted in expressions of terror. "What is this?" Maria whispered, stepping back in horror. Lily's smile widened. It's time for you to join them. With a jolt, Maria snapped back to reality and broke free from Lily's grip. She ran toward the front door, but the moment she reached it, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw Lily again, this time her eyes glowing unnaturally bright, her smile wide and malicious. You're not leaving, Lily said, her voice now a low, guttural growl. Terrified, Maria bolted outside into the cold night, not knowing where to run. She heard the wind picking up around her, the howling filling her ears as she raced into the forest. The trees seemed to close in on her, the shadows thickening around her. No matter how far she ran, it felt like the forest was never ending. It was as if she was running in place, stuck in some endless nightmare. Finally, after what felt like hours, Maria stumbled into a clearing. In the center stood a weathered stone well. Desperate for help, she approached it, but as she looked down into the well, she saw something that made her stomach lurch. At the bottom, beneath the stagnant water, was a collection of bones, human bones, and lying on top of them was a single photograph. It was the same photo from inside the cabin, the one that had been changed, but this time it wasn't Lily in the picture. It was Maria. Suddenly, she heard a voice, soft but clear, coming from behind her. I told you that you'd be perfect for the family photo album. She spun around, but before she could react, something cold and strong grabbed her from behind. A dark figure loomed over her, and the world went black. The next morning, when the sun rose over the mountain, the cabin stood eerily quiet. Lily was gone, but Maria was nowhere to be found either. The police searched the area for days, but all they found was an empty photograph album with a new picture inside. It was of a woman, staring blankly into the camera, her face twisted in terror, her body slumped against the stone well. No one knew what happened to Maria, but some say that when the wind blows through the trees in that forest, you can hear her voice calling out in the night.